morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Scott Stedman podcast. I hope you are all having a wonderful day. This week, my kids went back to school from spring break. Actually, they had a little bit of a longer spring break. They had Monday off as well for a teacher in service day. And then I was at the Reach gathering at the Naz in Grove City the past few days, which is a sports, fitness, and recreation ministers gathering because they don't like the word conference. If you do conference, you have to do 15 push-ups, and I don't feel like doing push-ups today. But who is on spring break this week is Micah Current. Micah, how is your spring break going so far?
I just want to clarify that the university where I work is on spring break. I, as a staff
You as
person,
an entity is not on spring
am
break.
not on spring break. Like I am here, I'm working, I worked every day, um, taking my lunch hour out to record with you, but like it's dead here. There's nobody here. So there may be a couple of international students because obviously it'd be stupid to fly to, you know, Japan or China or the Middle East or something for less than a week and then come back. It would just be crazy. I mean, some people do,
See,
but
if
it's
you were on spring break, you'd have to change your background to like you being like at like Palm
the
Beach,
beach.
Florida or something.
The beach.
At the beach.
But
No.
yeah, I mean it's quiet around here. It's dead. It usually is. It's like this right around Christmas break too. And for summer. But like we still work. The only people that don't work when students aren't are the faculty because they don't really have anything to do. So um
Yeah.
anyway.
Awesome. So today we're going to do something a little fun, maybe a little controversial. Who knows? Depends on what comes out of our mouths. But with things progressing with the general director position at the Church of God of Anderson, Indiana, and them trying to finally get people to be the interim and also the general director, I thought it'd be a fun idea. Like, what if in a alternate universe, you, Micah, was the general director. You got hired. You've been confirmed by GA, and you are now the general director of the Church of God. So, what would be some of the things that you would want to try to do or change as the general director of the Church of God? Um, so let's just go ahead and just start with what's the first thing that comes off your head? You're general director. What's the first thing you really want to change?
Um I mean there are several things. But I think what I would do is I would have a Zoom meeting with all of my leadership, whether it's my executive team that would be serving right under me, state pastors, state leaders, district leaders, and just kind of take a census of where we are as a church and really just try to um, encourage them that there is still a future in this.
Hmm.
And I think that I would also encourage them that change is inevitable and that we need to get on board with that. And after having that meeting, I think that I would probably really push, and Scott, I mean, really push for two things. One, just transparency, like transparency across all of our social platforms, our websites, being more engaged with multiple generations, whether it's through video, whether it's through streaming, whether it's through podcasting, whether it's through, and I know Jim Lyon did several of those things, but
Hmm.
not as consistently as, like you and I do it, for example. We do it weekly.
Right.
But like I would, and I would interview people. Like I would talk to people from all over the country, all over the world. I include our missionaries in that too. And I would also just in the same vein and the same conversation of transparency, I don't know that a general director can do this, but I would push really, really hard for some continuity between state leadership, district leadership, and national leadership, so that when something happens to a pastor in a local church, that person knows who to get a hold of. Or if I called my district or called my state or called national, they would give me the same answer across the board. Um, I would really, really push for that just because as a young pastor myself and over the years as I've made transitions in ministry, it's been increasingly difficult for me to get an answer from my state, from my district, from my national offices. And from what I've gathered and what you've gathered and some of the conversations we've had offline, nobody talks to each other. So I, the two things would be really transparency and communication. And, taking a census or taking a real stab at like figuring out where we are and what to do with churches as they continue to struggle, um, both locally and nationally.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Like, because again, communication has been, I'm, see, and that's the thing. Like, as far as communication, I almost believe, because I know a lot of times people always say, well, Jim was always a very great communicator. And I would to his credit, I would say yes. I think the challenge that we see is that, there could be something that Jim's saying to the body, whether that's through a newsletter, whether that's through a video or whatnot, but how that trickles down to if that same messaging is being communicated from state leadership, which is also the same messaging that's being communicated within like maybe regional leadership, if you have a big enough state to have like different sections or regions or districts, to is it being communicated within the local church? Because I think a lot of times, if there's times where things aren't being communicated, that means it allows people to assume things or even to allow people to um, kind of like fill in the blank where it may or may not be kind of the intent of what national leadership is saying or wants. So it gets muddy. And I think kind of what you're saying is like, hey, I'm going to meet with my teams. We're going to make sure that we have a great trust and communication and transparency among the teams. And then we want to make sure that we're communicating that same type of branding, that same type of message of transparency to others. So then that way everybody across the board is good and is there. So yeah, I think that is something that I think is something that's very much needed within the Church of God. And if that's something where it needs to be more communication, or if it's something where we have to change policy to make sure that same messaging is getting out, then we need to be able to do that.
Yeah.
What
And I
what else
think,
is on what else is on your well, do you have any more thoughts on
well, I
communication?
think too that like, the idea that, I know that when Jim came in, this was back in like 2013 for his first term, um, there was this idea that he was going to form this cabinet of sorts, and each of those cabinet members were going to, this person was going to handle North America, this person was going to handle the Church of God in Europe, this person was going to handle Asia and Africa and like deal with missionaries, and some were going to deal with the church in the United States, and then they were going to be in different regions, whether it was the Pacific Northwest or Southwest or Northeast or Northwest or Southeast. And it just, to me, it looked good on paper as a business practice, but I don't know how well that was executed over the course of time. And I also think too that like if your state's big enough to have a state pastor and state leadership, then why is that a thing? Um, I would probably get rid of some of the staff, the excessive, because like higher education at the moment, financial things are always a concern. And if the Church of God is struggling for money, why are we paying for extra people to have jobs and positions when we're paying other people to be state pastors and be on staff in those states? So I would definitely have, I guess, less of a national presence and as in respect to teams, like a team, and really focus on state leadership and district leadership because that's where the source of your problems are. Yes, you have Anderson, which is like this hub, right? but you have all these churches all over the country, and you know, I know it's impossible for a general director to visit every single church every single year. But like, that's why you have state leadership. That's why you have district leadership. People serve in districts as district pastors and state pastors, and they go and they should travel and meet with pastors. And hey, if you're struggling, let me mentor you. Let me walk through this with you. Hey, if it's a mental health issue, let's get you some counseling. If it's, an infidelity problem with your marriage or whatever, let's talk about that and get through that. And, not just, oh, hey, you're fired. Let's work on a transition plan if need be. And, have all of these. It goes back to the word conversation, like I said earlier. If you don't have the conversation, then you're never going to know the details. And if you don't know the details, you can't work out a plan to fix those things. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And I mean, I think even the idea of, is something, because I guess, as times change, as culture change, and especially, changes have to happen because, if you're struggling with finances, you're going to have to make some cuts. If you're exploding with finances, there might be things you might be able to create some things that might be able to help make your job more effective. So like even like with regional ministers, like there's a like when I was in Virginia, like I would get a call from an email or sometimes a call from the regional representative of the National Church of God, just saying, hey, just letting you know I'm praying for you. I'll get a card around Christmas from them. Everything else, which is nice, and I think that's great. At the same time, I didn't really understand, well, what's his role? Is he just there to just say, hey, I'm your regional person. I'm here for you if you need
I'm
me.
praying for you.
And I'm praying for you. Like, okay, but like, what else do you do? And, because if you're getting, I mean, if you're getting paid, like, let's say if you're working part-time at a church in Kentucky, and then you're also getting paid on the side from national to be the regional minister, that's fine. But then what But I think that's the thing, like, and I'm not, trying to dig prayer or anything, but it's like, it's nice to have someone praying for me or someone who calls and checks up on me, a couple times a year. I think that's fantastic. But, sometimes I also have a state director that does that too. So why do I need a regional person that's doing the same thing that the state person is doing?
Yeah.
Can we give that 20 grand that we're giving to the regional person, just give it to my state director who's also part-time? Like that's something, right? Um, so yeah, so what else is on the docket?
What other questions would you ask, like a
Oh,
potential candidate,
well,
or
I mean,
or
so
ask me as if like you're pastoring a church and you walk
like
in?
if this is the town hall, I'm going to ask you questions.
Well, town
Okay,
hall, or if
so
you
all
were
right,
like,
I'm just going to rapid fire.
okay,
So we talked about communication, and we talked a little bit about leadership and trying to get that together. Um, there's so many. Okay, so General Director Micah, there has been so many of late, a lot of these different groups that are calling each other out, saying that they're part of the Church of God or they're not Church of God. How do I know which of these groups are actually affiliated with the Church of God Anderson and which are just using our name but are not necessarily have any type of official affiliation with our brand? So, for an example, there's times where I see stuff for the National Association. There's stuff I see that's for Pastors Fellowship. There's stuff I see for Cog Affirm. Like, how do I know which is official Church of God, official Church of God group, and what is not?
I think a lot of that goes back to the branding conversation, right? Like, um, and that takes communicating with each other, which is kind of ironic because marketing and branding and stuff is rooted from communications, right? And so, um, I think that let's take Pastor Fellowship, for example. It, it's always been this super conservative, good old boys country club mentality of like, oh, we have this kind of like a mini revival, camp meeting style thing. That's a 2-day thing. But like we promoted ourselves, but like the national offices, do they promote it? And if so, where? So, in the age of like, you know, instant gratification on these phones that we have, these cell phones, uh, it's nothing for you and me to pick up the phone and, pull up TikTok and see a 30-second video inviting you to something. And it could be a church, it could be a youth group, it could be an event that the church is hosting. Um, I think over the course of my tenure in ministry, I've tried to manage and do social media at different various roles in the churches that I've worked at. And some churches get really on board with that and it helps them stay informed, which is great. And then there's others where it's like you could post every stinking thing every day and people just not care, right? And so nobody likes the post, nobody shares the post, nobody even comments on it, whatever. Or it's a bad comment, which is another story for another day. But you know, in the age of trying to reach a younger generation who sits on Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok all day long and looks at reels, like you got to meet people where they are. And I think that, you don't have to overdo it. You don't have to make it overly difficult in respect to the content you're creating, but at least talk to one another, right? Like it's there are so many different ways that you can market yourself and brand yourself and promote yourself these days. TikTok is free, Instagram is free, Facebook is free, YouTube is free. Like you can, anybody could be an entrepreneur, I guess is what I'm saying. And so I think if you partner that with things like Pastor's Fellowship, Camp Meeting, National Convention, IYC, you know, for this is just my opinion, but like I don't get on the Church of God Facebook very often. I don't see they don't post very often unless it's something like a town hall that Jim's hosting or something like that, or when they announce speakers for events. But like I would be posting the crap out of stuff every day. Hey, we have IYC coming up. Hey, Pastor Fellowship's coming up. Hey, we have these district camp meetings in these states in June and July and August. Oh, by the way, we have whatever in the fall, and it represents multiple generations. It represents different groups. It represents different things. And in respect to your question about are groups part of the Church of God or not, that would probably have to be a separate discussion, right? Like you would have to probably meet with that group, me in this illustration would have to meet with that group and be like, hey, where are we? Are you guys Church of God or not? Are you guys ordained, affiliated with the Church of God or not? Do you want this group to be a part of the Church of God or not? Does it fall in line with our theology? All those questions would need to be answered. And if they're just going out and going rogue and doing it and putting the Church of God label on it, I don't think that's okay.
Mm.
But I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, but you bring up another good question is you mentioned about, you talk about our theology and
Yep.
kind of what we believe. And when I look at the Church of God website, which is not churchofgod.org, it's Jesus is the subject.org, um,
Mhm.
which, that may or may not be an issue. But when I look at the beliefs, the missions and the beliefs and the values of the Church of God, everything talks a lot about holiness and salvation. But I don't see too much stuff on there that talks a little bit about what the Church of God believes in regards to things like baptism or more of the praxis, like how do we live this out when we're practicing, when we're loving our neighbor, or social justice, or human sexuality. Like if I'm somebody who's going to your website to understand what the Church of God stands for and what it believes, how do I get that information? Because the website's only giving me a snapshot, but it's not giving me the full smorgasbord of what you guys are all about.
Yeah. Um,
So how do I get that information, General Director Micah?
no, I was thinking back to the round table that Jim did when he was talking specifically about the chalk affirm thing and how what marriage, the definition of marriage is in respect to the Bible, in respect to the Church of God and where that stands. Um, some would argue that it shouldn't have taken that long for somebody to get on a live stream to say, "Hey, we believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. That's it."
Mhm.
Um, others would argue that we shouldn't have this conversation because it's in Scripture. Um, but as you mentioned just a moment ago, Scott, the idea of human sexuality and mental illness and mental health and various topics that people are struggling with these days, you have to have those conversations. You can't, we're not in a situation or a setting where we can just be passive about it anymore. It's here. It's now. It's it's in everything that we say and do. It's, you know, you can't turn TV on it at all without seeing some sort of, whether it's a cartoon, a live action, a movie, a series, a TV show, there's going to be somebody who's gay on it. There's going to be somebody who's from, a different ethnicity on it. There's going to be, you know, Jesus didn't say that there wouldn't be those kinds of folks in the world or that we wouldn't face those kind of challenges. It's just how we react, I think, is crucial when creating and fostering those relationships. Like we could say all day long, you and I could say all day long, like, yeah, we have this friend and they're gay, but can they serve in the church? And then nobody ever answers that question. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so it tends to be this vicious cycle of like, oh, this is an issue. We're going to talk about the issue, and then we never really get an answer to said issue, and then we just start all over again. But I think as time marches forward, you're going to get more and more people questioning things, which, you know, what is theology, Scott? It's figuring what you believe and why, and it's questioning what you believe and why. Um, I bet you any money on the world in the world that the disciples didn't have it all figured out back in the day when was like, "Hey, you're my disciples. You're going to follow me." You know, as they were learning how to preach the word and go out into the world and make disciples, it was like I don't think it was as easy as Scripture said it was. It wasn't just go and make disciples, right? Like there had to have been oppression and struggle and differences of opinion and even when you get into the Pauline letters the different struggles that the different churches had. I think of the Church of Corinth, like there was so much sexual immorality, and they don't go into a great detail of what it is, but you can imagine that it was pretty rough back then. And so, you know, I feel like I'm rambling at this point, but it's just like it's really hard to not embrace what's going on without having a conversation.
Mhm.
And seeing where people are and seeing how we can love them, seeing how we can share the gospel with them, and then showing them what reconciliation is. And if this is not, you know, okay by what we believe, is there the transforming power of the Holy Spirit that can change who they are, then that's only a work that God can do. We could share the gospel. You know what I mean? Like this conversation got really heavy.
I know it got really, really heavy. Yeah. Um,
But am I making sense? Like it just seems like, you know, it's not just like 30 years ago where it's like, oh, we just talked about people that were different from us, whether they were gay or different, from a different ethnicity or background. And we just talked about it, but we didn't really say it. It was kind of under the rug. And now we're faced with these same conversations today, but it's more in our face than ever. And we need to ask the questions like, hey, how can we work with this? How can we love these people? How can they serve the church? Do they want to serve the church? Do they want to believe in Jesus? Like all those questions need to be answered.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the big thing is, when we think about our statement of faith or our theology that we put on our website as a Church of God, as much as that's good of how we understand about things like the human condition, sin, grace, Jesus, God, the Holy Spirit, etc., when it comes to a culture, a world where there's so many things that's changing or so many things can like come up, like the fact that, what, like almost 8 years ago, that's when we're having the like the Me Too movement, and then we're also having Black Lives Matter, and we're having all this stuff that's being posted in major media outlets. And it's almost like, as a church, I feel like that as a national organization or a national denomination, you have to be able to always go out there and say, hey, here's kind of where we stand, here's kind of what we believe, here's kind of what it is. And not necessarily like we believe in Black Lives Matters in that movement, but we can say we believe that everybody, whether of different race, different cultures, that that they are children of God. And that could be the stance. So we should always treat them like they are, a child of God. And I think when we kind of are constantly communicating that, that should kind of get people to know, okay, here's what we're about, here's what we believe. I think a lot of times within churches and denominations, what ends up happening is you say it once, you might have it on a site, you may say it within a general assembly meeting, and there's the assumption that everybody within the Church of God now knows what we stand for and what we believe. But the problem is as we begin to have more people join the movement, as we begin to have newer generations rise up as they get older and they're thinking about these things, or they are becoming leaders within their churches, or they're going to Bible schools and they're going to seminaries, then I think a lot of time, and then when we have something like a big national outcry happen, then that's when we have to kind of, again, repeat everything again. If there's another big thing where the thing about human sexuality comes up, we have to say, as of right now, this is the Church of God stance when it comes to human sexuality. And that is what we say, this is what we believe. And I think it's something that not only does national office have to kind of say, here's what we believe and everything else, but that also has to kind of go down through credential channels so that when we have leaders who are going through the credentialing process, they know what the Church of God believes on these different topics. Because you don't want to have a minister who goes in and says, yes, I believe all the stuff that you have on your website for your theology. I'm all in favor for it. I believe I have the same view about God, Jesus, Holy Spirit, salvation, sin, end times, etc. And then you go, and next you know, you're in a state where the general director of your state is a female, and you're thinking, whoa, 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 whoa. What's that woman doing being in a high leadership, and why does she have the REV in front of her name? Women can't be pastors. And then it's like, oh, we just ordained someone who obviously does not know that historically the Church of God has always cemented and has always encouraged the calling of women in ministry. And now what do we do? Sorry, we got to take that now because we didn't do our due diligence as a credentialing team to let you know, by the way, we do ordain women in our movement.
Yeah.
So, all right, you have time for one more question before you have to get on your plane and fly back to Anderson? General Director Micah.
Considering where I'm at, Anderson's only about 90 minutes for me.
Well, that's true. It's a little bit long. It's probably only like, 2 hours for me. But
I couldn't tell you the last time I went to Anderson.
I do. I remember last time I went to Anderson, it was a couple of years ago. So my last question is, I'm a pastor who is pastoring a small church bivocationally. The
Mhm.
church doesn't have lots of money. They're definitely not paying me a lot either. However, recently we keep seeing that our rates to register as pastors and as churches keep climbing up and keep rising. And right now, I don't understand A, why these rates keep climbing and how it's and what do I need to do and it's not really clear on what I need to do as someone who can't pay the full $80 for my minister fee or pay the $300 for my church's registration because they just don't have the money. And what's all that money going for? What's happening? Do we have to close the church because we can't we can't pay the church yearbook fee, our yearly church yearbook fee because we can't afford it as a small church or as a small time pastor.
I think it's a great question. As you and I have had conversations offline,
Mhm.
we've talked about how some churches who have the name on their sign, Church of God, but they don't really buy into what the national offices are selling. Um, and they like, for example, they just don't pay their dues. And so what happens? Nothing, at least to my understanding. Um, and then like the situation like you're presenting, small to mid-sized church, pastor's bivocational, barely hanging on. He's working two jobs. He's got three kids, eh, whatever. Um, I would see that's the thing though too. Like with the structure of how the leadership of the Church of God is, I'm not going to get on a side tangent, I promise. But it's just like if things need to be amended or changed, you have to wait 2 years to go to a general assembly and at a national conference.
Mhm.
And it may or may not be talked about. It may or may not be voted on. It may or may not even be brought up. But back to the conversation of being a general director, like what kind of power does that person have? And what I mean by that is like, okay, if a church is struggling and there's a bivocational pastor and he can barely pay the bills and the church is struggling financially, like, is it possible for me to have a discussion with that pastor and say, hey, we realize you're struggling. We could either A, do a payment plan, B, we could cut your fee in half, or hey, we're gonna forgo the fee this year and you focus on paying your bills. You focus on growing your church. And then next year, if things are going well, maybe you could just pay the fee and move forward. Like being willing to have the conversations, as I said about 30 times while we've been recording this episode, like I think it starts with the conversation. And if people don't want to have the conversation and just automatically assume that it's going to be the worst case scenario, then no wonder, right? And so I think I think that's a reasonable solution, don't you?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think in what we're really just kind of brushing the surface. I know this is like a fun little exercise, but I don't think people really know all the stuff that a general director has to do, and also to kind of make sure that all their teams from all over the United States or all over the world have to do to kind of make sure that things are running smoothly and people not only that a the ministry is running smoothly, but B is everybody still in alignment with the missions and values of the Church of God. And I think that kind of becomes a very difficult thing to navigate. And then, like what we've kind of mentioned at the end, is like if there's something that needs to be decided on or something major, it's like, well, you have to wait. You have to wait 2 years for it to get voted on by the assembly. And I know a lot of times, like within local churches, like, yeah, we want to make sure we have a business meeting to say, hey, but even if there's an emergency, like if as we if we're a church that has like 20 acres of land and we mow our own grass, so we're not paying mowers to do it, and our big industrial John Deere mower breaks down and is going to cost a pretty penny to repair, then what we do is if within our bylaws, if it's more than what's allotted for us to spend money on to do repair or maintenance on church property or church building, then we have to call a specially called business meeting. We give 2 weeks in advance. Hey, we're having a business meeting. Here is the topic of what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about this church mower, what we're going to do. And then we sit there and we have a meeting and everyone shows up and we have a discussion and we vote on it if we can actually spend more money than what's allowed and where we're going to pull that money from to repair the mower, or if we're just going to say nope and we're going to wait and we're just going to have mowers come and mow our grass for the rest of the summer. Like, that's kind of our options. And I think, and I don't understand why, as a Church of God, as a national office, I can't, as general director, and again, this is not me, that'll be next week, where you have to say, okay, what can we do to send an email or a letter to everybody within the Church of God and say, hey, here's the situation, here's the need, here's the issue. We're going to do a live stream. We're going to do a live stream thing. We're going to talk about it. There's going to be a transcript. And then on this date, you have until then on Tuesday, you're going to vote whether we're going to go forward with this or not. And you have from 8 a.m. to 8 a.m. p.m. to vote on this topic on this day through whatever system or algorithm we have set up. And then after that, we can make our decision. I don't know why that can't happen, or is there something within the national bylaws that we can't do this? So is that something we need to change?
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's going to do it for us. So Micah, again, thank you for being the guinea pig of this experiment of trying to be the general director for the day. Friends, let us know some of the topics, or hey, even if you have questions, because again, I'm going next week, so maybe you're like, hey, this is what we want you to cover, like, so we're not talking about the same stuff that questions I gave to Micah. Like, here's some things that we want to know. Like, if you were the general director, how would you handle this situation or that situation? What would you do about this issue or that issue? So again, friends, thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll be back on with another episode. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Scott Stedman Podcast. The Scott Stedman Podcast is made possible by support from our listeners. We thank listeners like Patty and Scott, whose support goes to this podcast's continual growth and maintenance. If you want to support this podcast, you can do so in a number of ways. First, feel free to give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed this episode and share it with your friends. If you'd like to financially support the Scott Stedman Podcast, you can go to the website ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman Podcast. That website again is ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman Podcast. Thank you so much for listening.